Perfect. So today we will finish the last topic, the last slides of HTML. Do you remember that there were some slides that I told you that had much more sense to see today, that we were going to talk about CSS? So we'll finish those slides and then we will start talking about CSS. Do you remember what CSS is? The colors, the visual aspect of the site, the styling of the website. So up to now, our website, our HTML is super ugly because it doesn't have any styling, but with CSS we will be able to add the styling to our website. So, okay, last time we talked about the most important elements on HTML. We also said that as much as we can, we will try to use the elements that have some semantics to indicate which portion of our page corresponds to a specific element. Why did we say that it was important to use semantics rather than just a generic container? Yeah, the optimization for the SEO, that is for the search engines, let's say. So we are trying, yeah? Also for JavaScript, yeah. So we are trying to make it more understandable, not just for humans, but especially for the machines. Machines in this case is Google, machines in this case is the search engines. And then we saw that like these main elements for structuring the website. We also talked about the differences, for instance, between an article and a section, right? So we said that the section is something independent from the main content, while, for instance, the aside is like supplementary information that complements the main content. Is it everything clear up to now, this review? And then I show you this diagram in which basically helps us to define which kind of tag we want to use for each element, depending on the importance of the element, depending on the content that such element will have. This is a useful diagram when we are going to be working on our page structure to understand which specific tag to use. We also said that there are, who remembers what the block display means? What it stands for? Yeah, in the case of the block display, we said that the element will occupy all the space that it has available. So even if, for instance, the text or the content is super small, like in our case, the block display means that it will occupy all the width, okay? And we said that by default, there are elements that have the block display, okay? Okay. Finally, maybe last time I didn't talk too much about div. What is the div? It's like a generic container, okay? So it's a super generic container in which we can put elements within, okay? We can use it whenever we want. As I told you, there is no difference between using, for instance, article or div, other than adding some semantics to the element. So it doesn't mean that all of the contents in our page must be articles, aside, or have a semantic. Sometimes maybe we just have to group 3 elements, so we try to put them within a div, and it's completely fine. But as much as possible, if it's possible, let's try to use like the semantic elements that we do have. Okay, so up to now, any questions? Did you have the chance to check some website to see if this happened? If it has those elements? Okay, yeah?
Can I ask what's
sure.
The exact point of footer?
The exact point of footer, what do you mean?
I mean, because like, for example, I thought maybe it was supposed to be exactly at the end of every...
No, because the semantic tags doesn't have any repercussion on the placement of the elements. With the semantic tags, I could, for instance, put like the first container could be the footer, and the last one can be the header, and it will be fine. So it doesn't have any repercussion on the placement within the screen. It is just to indicate that all the components or the elements that will be within that container will belong to the footer somehow. I'm telling you, in my page, the footer will have these elements, but I'm not saying visually how it will present. Because for the visual aspect of the website and the placement of the elements, we of course need CSS. Okay, so here is just semantics. It's like a hint that I'm giving to the machines to indicate that in that container, that I'm building a footer within that container, something like that. Okay. Okay. Perfect. So up to now, we've seen that the declaration of the elements of the elements work with the tags syntax, no? So we open a tag, we write, for instance, header, we write within that tag or below that line the contents of the header, and then we close the tags. Okay? Then we have something that are the attributes. So for instance, you remember that the last time there was this attribute that was the language, and the attributes worked like a key pair, like a key value pair. So there was the key, the name of the attribute, and then a specific value for that attribute. So in this case, there are two very important attributes that all of the HTML elements have. So one of them is the class, and the other one is the ID. So all of the elements in HTML have these two attributes, the class and the ID. The language, the lang that we saw last time, for instance, it just belongs to the HTML element. It doesn't apply for all the elements, but the class and the ID are for all the elements. So in the case of the class, that we still don't know what it means, but just for the syntax aspect, it is a space separated list of class names. So in this example, for instance, we have one class that is called AA, then another class that is BB, and then another class that is CC. Okay, so here we have three classes. It defines the classes that an element belongs to, okay? And it is used with the CSS. It makes sense with the CSS and in JavaScript, no? Conceptually, how does it work? Conceptually, it works that in the CSS, I will be able to say all of the elements that belong to the class AA, I want the text, for instance, to be blue. Or all of the elements who belong to the class BB, I want the background to be yellow. Or all of the elements who belong to the class CC, I want to have a border with these characteristics, okay? So that's conceptually how it will work. And in JavaScript, it is used like, I want that when I click on an element that belongs to a class AA, a pop-up appears. Or I want that if I click over an element that belongs to the class BB, some animation will occur, or some element or some other element will be hidden, or something like that, okay? So conceptually, it's like a way that we have for identifying and grouping elements through the class. And then we have the ID. So what do you think the difference between ID and the class? That the ID is unique. No? So many elements might belong to the same class, but the ID is unique. The ID is a way that I use to identify one single element in my page. So there cannot be two elements with the same ID within my page. Why is useful the ID? Because it helps us to, in a very accurate way, point to a specific element. Not many elements, but a single element within the page. So it is a unique identifier for an element. It must be unique within the HTML. And it is used the same in CSS and in JavaScript to select and manipulate the element. Not the elements, but the element, okay? Then there is another attribute. It exists, it works, but we will try to think that it doesn't exist because we will never use this syntax, because it's a bad practice, because it's difficult, because it basically ruins everything. And it is the chance that we have to apply the CSS directly within the HTML. Now we will see that it works, that we will have HTML files as the one that we had last time, and then we will have CSS files, okay? And how it should work and how it must work is that from the HTML files, we will import the CSS and we will be able to use what we define in the CSS. By doing in this way, what we are saying is we are going to do everything within the HTML. Which doesn't make sense, which is a bad practice, because we are mixing up two things. We are mixing up the structure of the page and we are mixing up the appearance of the page. Okay, so the good practice is to separate, to split these two concerns among different files and then just simply use them from the HTML. So I'm just saying this because technically this works. I mean, if in an element I write a style and then I write CSS code, it will apply the style to the element, but we will never do it in this way, okay? So up to now, is everything clear?
I
Yep.
have a question, like these attributes, should we define them by ourselves, or like some of them are defined by them? Like for example, the ID.
By ourselves. Yeah, but we will.
The ID we have to say this ID belongs to you.
These are the?
For example, this ID number is for you. Like we have to define it by ourselves.
Yeah. You mean like the name of the classes?
Yes.
Yeah, we have to define the name. I mean, the class and the ID attributes are default attributes that belong to all of the HTML elements. And then the name that we want to give to the ID, for instance, it is something that we must choose. Yeah, it is up to us the name that we want to give to each class or to each ID. So, for instance, we still don't know how it works, but what I've just told you in theory, in practice, means that to any element here in the HTML, I mean in the body, that is the one that makes more sense, because it has to do basically with the graphical appearance, and last time we saw that the things that are in the head are not visible like in the graphical interface. It is some metadata, it is like the title of the website, but it is not something that is being shown. But what I told you before is that I can, for instance, here in the header, add something like class, my, or for instance here, my, let's write it like this, my class. No? So I can very randomly, however I want, add a class there. I don't know still what this class do. I mean, if I execute this, it will remain the same because I'm not doing anything with that class, okay? I'm just giving an attribute to an element, and through this attribute in particular, I'm saying that it belongs to a class that I decided to name my class. Which was the other attribute that I could apply anywhere? The ID, right? So for instance, here in the H1 element, I could say this will have an ID, and I could write like welcome message. Okay? And I could do this in any element here. That's what I was saying before. So there are two attributes that apply to all of the elements. One of them is the class, the other one is the ID. And the other one is the style, that is the one that we don't want to use. I will just show this time, and for instance, color blue. And do you see that this one becomes blue? So what is the style for? For applying directly a CSS rule or a CSS, a CSS definition. For instance, here. Then I applied background color blue, and it applied the color blue. Okay. But remember, this is the way we will never use to apply the styles. This is just to give you an example. What happens? Is it possible if is it right if I do this, for instance? Is it fine? Yeah, because the class can be applied to several elements, but the ID can be applied just to a single element. So it wouldn't be fine if I do something like this. Okay? So important, I did this, but as you see, the page didn't crash. I mean, it worked, but it's inconsistent. And especially when we will try to manipulate the page with the CSS or with the JavaScript, if there are two IDs, then it will, we will have like an undesired behavior in the page, okay? Why do you think I would like to use 2 times the same class, or in 2 different elements the same class?
So you can reuse the style that you applied to this class to another type?
Sure, basically because of that. Because in this way I can reuse the style that I have defined in 2 different elements. No? So in this case, for instance, if both the header and the footer have the same width, for instance, and I have defined the width and the aspect that I want to give to the header and the footer, and they are the same, then by applying the same class, I am applying the style to both elements. Okay? All of this will make more sense when we will see CSS, but conceptually, is that the idea, okay? So, no questions? We're fine? Perfect. So now we will talk about CSS. It is, as you said before, is the way that we have to enhance or to work on the visual presentation of the site. In these slides, we will understand the fundamentals of CSS, that stands for Cascading Style Sheets. We will see why it is cascading. We will explore the key concepts and the best practices, and we will apply some CSS, some basic CSS on the web pages, okay? So first of all, we always start from our, the same slide that is our roadmap in the course. Where do you think that the CSS will be? In here? Always in the front end, no? We are still working on the browser, we are still working on what the user sees and the presentation with which the user will interact, so it will be here. So we moved from HTML to CSS. We already saw this, that is the definition of the front end. And now we will start with CSS. So we have that in the CSS syntax, it uses some rules to style the HTML elements. What is a rule? Is something that defines a specific visual property of the site for one or more elements. Okay. Each rule consists of a selector and some declarations. And I have to tell you that although this might seem difficult or complex, it's super easy. Okay, it's trivial because it's something like this. Okay. So this is CSS. This is the syntax of CSS. Even if I don't explain you what this means, I think we all might infer what it represents, no? What this rule does. So according to you, what does this rule changes? Okay. So the P stands for the paragraph. Yeah, so we are somehow inferring that this has to do with the paragraph. And then, well, from what is written there, makes the text blue. Okay. This color might be ambiguous, but okay, I will tell you it concerns the text. Okay. So how do we read this? I want the P elements, that all of the P elements in my HTML to have the text with the color blue. Okay. If instead of P here we had something like LI, do you remember which one was LI? The list, this one. This one. So what would happen in this case? All of the elements that belong, or all of the list elements would have the text in blue. Okay, so if I apply that style to this side, what would happen? First, second, and third would have the blue color. Okay, so super easy. We can apply it to a specific element, like in this case. So to all of the P elements, to all of the div elements, to anything we want. Okay. If I want, for instance, all of the titles to have some styling, I can say to all of the H1 elements, I want the color to be blue, the background to be gray, or something like that. Okay. As you can see here, we have also key value pairing. So it's super easy also. We have the name of the property and then the value for the property. The syntax, okay, is super easy. It has 2 points and then the semicolon. Yeah.
Is there a way to specify which paragraph you want to?
Sure. So yeah, now that you said that, how do you think we might make it work just for a specific paragraph? How do you think it could be achieved? Sure. So one alternative, if we want just a single paragraph and we already know which one is the paragraph or the element that we want to apply the style, is the ID, no? Because the ID points to a specific one and identifies a single element within the page. Or the other option is if I want to reuse the style among different components, then I use a class. Okay. Yeah. So in this case, what do you think it is happening in the right snippet? To which elements are we applying these styles? To the tag header and to the P, but in this case, P has a condition or something else. P with class intro. No? The P elements that belong to the class intro. So it's super powerful because by doing this, we can specify that it will apply not just to all of the P elements, but to a specific element that belongs to P and also have the class intro. Okay?
Can you also select multiple classes in this way? Like,
sure.
how would you write it?
Because here, next to p.intro, you place the comma, the colon, and then you can specify another one. You know that here I'm doing this for header, then we have the comma, and then we have the second one. I could do for as many elements as I want.
And if you want to select the classes which have like two specific ones, maybe that's...
What do you mean? Like
if you have an element with two classes, and
yeah.
you want to select those elements which have both.
Because in that case, yeah, it could happen also. One element that has two classes, for instance, no? And then I would have one rule or one declaration for one of the class, and then the declaration for the second class. So I would have something like AA and the definitions within the AA, and then the class BB and the definitions for the class BB. So if the element has the class AA and BB, it will apply both of the rules, the ones that I defined above and the ones that I defined below. On the?
Only if it has both.
What do you mean?
Like, can you apply the rule if it has both classes?
Sure. And it will apply all of the rules. Okay? It will apply them incrementally. Okay? Okay, so if each rule corresponds to a selector and declarations, both the syntax is super easy. It has the declarations on the left side, then it has the the 2 points, and then the value for that specific property. The semicolon is optional for the last declaration, but well, I think it is better or more easy if we also always apply the semicolon to all of the properties, even if it is not, even if it is the last one. Okay. Now, do you remember that last time I told you this about the tree structure that the HTML elements had, and that there was a reason for doing it that way, and so what's the reason? Because in this case, for instance, with the CSS, if we want to apply one style to many elements, it's much more easy to navigate through a tree structure element and apply it to different elements within that tree structure than if it were like a text or a string or a text-based document, okay? So by doing this, we are saying also that the styles can be inherited along the tree. And when there are conflicts or overlappings between the styles, what happens? The more specific is the one that prevails. So it's exactly like in this example, no? I said, I want the color in all of my, basically in all of my HTML, I mean all the elements within the body, I want the color to be green. What does it mean? That all of the elements within that tree structure below the body will have the text in green. Then I created a new rule in which I said, but I want the H1 to be red. So what happens there? The more specific one is the one that prevails. So all of the elements will take the green color, but the one for which I defined a specific style, that is the H1, will take the red color. Okay? Is it clear? Yeah.
The order in which you specify the rules doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. So even if in the CSS I have declared first the H1 and then the body, it doesn't change. Okay? Up to now? Okay, so let's try to integrate CSS in our very simple HTML so that I can explain all of the definitions of CSS by directly also showing to you how it behaves, okay? So how do I apply the CSS to an HTML document? As I told you before, on the one hand, we will have the HTML document. On the other hand, we will have the CSS files. And we will import somehow or integrate integrate into the HTML the definition of the CSS. What's the syntax for doing that? The syntax is the one that you are seeing in the above snippet, that is within the head, that is the space that we have for the meta definitions, for the importing elements. We will write something like this. We will create a link that is something that is representing a style sheet, and then we will reference the position or the location of the CSS in our regarding to our HTML. Okay, so do you remember that I told you that the things that we write in the head are not visual things, but declarations or something like that? So here, So I named this my CSS. Dot CSS. What does it mean, or what does it require to work? To have a file that is called mycss.css in the same location, okay? So here within the same folder I will create okay. So look at this. Now in my structure I have the HTML, both HTML that we worked on last time, and now we have something that is called mycss.css. Okay. What happened? Anything, because in the CSS I haven't defined anything. How do I know if the CSS is working? I could come here and write something like header. What's the syntax? Then I open the curly brackets, and well, let's say, for instance, what was written before, color, and let's say, well, whatever, this one, dark orange, okay? So do you see how it changed? Background color, and let's say brown. It's still very ugly, but it's how to show you how it works and how we have made the link between the structure of the document and the visual appearance of the document. Okay. What happens if maybe okay, is it fine this size? And can you see the code? Okay, yep. The HTML? Sure. This one is the one that makes the magic. Does it work? Okay, who wants to tell me what would happen if here I write like comma and then I write P? What? It will also apply that style to the P selector or to the P elements within my HTML, no? So you see? So up to now, again, it's still ugly, it's still very basic, but the concept is super powerful because it means that by doing just a simple rule, we can almost format, we can format anything within our HTML. What if we try to do p.intro? It doesn't work anymore because it is not being applied to all of the P elements, but just to the P elements that belong to the class intro. So to make it work, I should do something like P class intro. Okay? Are we fine with this? up to now? Is it working in your laptops? Nice. Now, if I click in the, do you remember that we created like a second page that was the, just to show how the link worked? So what happens if I click into the link? What happened with the other page? It still doesn't have anything. Why does it why it doesn't have anything? Yeah, we need to add the styling, and we add the style by doing the same thing that we did before. So by copy pasting this link into the head. And why it is still not doing anything? Because in our CSS, we don't have any definition for the elements that we have here, no? Because our definition was for the header, and our definition was for the p.intro element. So what's also super powerful here, that if I say that this element in a different HTML belongs also to the class intro, it will automatically apply that style also for that class, no? So the class somehow is a way of grouping elements, of adding the same style to different elements, even if they are in different pages. Is that clear? Perfect. So now that this has more sense, we can get back here. So similar as the HTML, there are like hundreds of CSS properties, and they are basically defined for everything. And as more sophisticated the HTML and the web development gets, more properties are included there. Okay, this is a standard, so all of the web pages have these standards. All of them have HTML, all of them have CSS. It is not like a programming language that we choose for our implementation or for our course, but all of the web pages are built with HTML and CSS. If you don't believe me, then we can open whatever. For instance, this one. That is not because of Apple, but because they are very, I mean, the design is very well done, and then we inspect the element, and then here you can see that we have the HTML, and the super nice thing in my point of view of web development is that you can get inspiration from whatever, I mean, all of the pages in the world are written in this way. So if you want to see how a website was built, you can just check how the HTML was structured and how the CSS was built, okay? So here, for instance, we know for this A class element, or yeah, for this element, the CSS that is being applied is this one, no? These are the CSS rules that are being applied to that element. Of course, it is a lot more sophisticated and complex than ours, but it's the same syntax, it's the same concepts, and it is the same way it behaves, okay? So once again, if you are curious about seeing how a website is built, you can just inspect the website, and for each element, for instance, we want to see how the footer was built here. We can go down. Here we have, for instance, the footer class, the footer element, no? So we can come here, and then you can see which were the properties that were applied to that specific element, okay?
But for such complex modern websites, is the HTML and CSS written by hand, or do they use some framework?
Nice, a good question. So of course, there are frameworks, and we will use frameworks, because there are some things that we want to do with our website that we are not the first one trying to do them in that way, no? So for instance, millions of people before us have had the need to write a footer that looks like this, no? So what's the point of starting from scratch all the times, writing each one his own footer? So that's why we have frameworks that will help us and will make this a lot more easier. But still we have to learn the basics and the concepts, because then we want to customize such frameworks and to know how they behave. So we still have to know the basis so that we can build upon those bases. And the framework we will use in this course is Bootstrap. Bootstrap, it is called Bootstrap for CSS. This one, you mean?
Yeah, because we need the side sheet.
Okay. Yeah, this one. Yeah. No, because I don't know, because I wrote this. So up to now we have this. Yeah. Maybe you didn't see when I wrote that intro, but it is because it was. But of course, if it were just like P, it would be like to all of the elements independently if they belong to that class or not. Okay. Okay, once again, do we need to know which are, or to learn all of this or memorize all of these properties? Of course not, but we should know they exist. And we should know that this is the website where we can find the reference to know what we can do, okay? Although there are some important rules that it is important to understand how they work so that we can then customize our site or set up the structure of our website visually. So what do you think this is? If we try to read this property. It's super easy. Who wants to? It is supposed to make the width of the header 1,000 pixels, okay? So if I don't want the header to occupy all of the width, or if I want to set a specific width, then I write this property. I want the header to occupy 1,000 pixels, okay? Okay, so this is super nice, but it has an issue, or it has a problem, no? What's the problem with this, with defining the things in this way? Yeah, that maybe if I open the website in the computer, works super fine, I can see everything in the header, but then if I open it in the cell phone, I won't see anything, or I will see just a portion of the header. And then if I open that in the iPad, maybe I can see the 75% of the header, but not all of it, okay? So it's possible to define the things with fixed or absolute measures, but then we have that issue, okay? That it doesn't adapt to the different screens. Then we have the relative, okay. It doesn't mean that it is not possible or that it is a bad practice to use the absolute length unit. When, for instance, do we want to use an absolute length unit? Maybe with a button, no? Or with a small component. Because in a button, maybe if I set the same height or the same width for a button, it will visualize fine in the computer, but also in the cell phone and also on the iPad. So it is not forbidden to use this one, but in general, the rule is for structuring or for the structuring elements of the website, it is not advised to use this one, okay? So for setting up like the layout of the website, it's better not to use absolute measures, but relative ones. So which one are the relatives? These ones. So let's start from bottom to top, because they are maybe the easiest ones. So the percentage, what do we think the percentage might be? A percentage of the parent element, okay? Relative to the parent element. Then we have VH that is relative to the height of the viewport. In this case, what is the viewport? The browser, no? So if I say I want it to be 1 VH, it means I want it to occupy 1% of the available space in the browser, okay? It happens the same with the other one, but the one is related to the width of the browser, of the window, okay? So what's the difference between these three percentages? The last one is relative to my parent element. So if I am a paragraph and I am within the body syntax, the body tag, then I will occupy the percentage that I define related to a space that my parent occupies. The other ones are not related to the parent component, but to the window. And then we have the two other ones that are the ones that maybe we will try to use the most. It always depends on what we're trying to size. So on the one hand, we have the RAM that is related to the font size of the root element of the page. Okay, so there is a property that is called font size, and the HTML by default has a font size. Well, let's see if here we can. Okay, so by default, it wasn't visible for us, but there is a font size property that is linked to the HTML. And we can change the font size. In this case, we changed the font size, and we said that I want our font size in the whole document to be extra large, okay? And did you see that all of the elements there, all of the text elements increased? So, okay. Do you remember always to be formatting the code? So to make it clear and clean, always Alt-Shift-F, okay? Okay, so what I'm trying here is not to make this to look fine, but I'm doing just some random rules to show you some concepts, okay? So for instance, there is something that you will see later and that we will use a lot, that is a property called padding, okay? So just to show you like all of the examples that we have seen so far, we can set the padding with an absolute measure, no? So the absolute measure was indicating a specific value. So for instance, 200 pixels, okay? What happened there? Or indeed, let's try just first with 20. What do you think the padding is for? Is to set like a space between the margin or the border and the content within the container, no? So when the padding was 0, it didn't have any space between the content and the border of the container. If I set the padding to 20, you know that the container has still the same measures, but within the containers, it leaves a margin between the elements that it contains and the border of and the margin and the border, yeah. Okay, so this is like a random property that I want to use just to show some concepts. So what's the problem with the absolute value? That if I, for instance, here I have very limited space, no? If I set this, for instance, 30, here it occupies a lot. Maybe if I open the website from the browser, okay. With the whole screen, it's fine because I see that the margin is fine. But here it doesn't occupy that much space. But with a smaller screen, such as in here, it is too much. It is occupying a lot of space. The same happens if I open from the phone. So the problem with the absolute values is that they don't adapt to the screen that I'm seeing them, from which I am opening the website. What is the alternative to this, to the absolute values? The first one that we saw was the percentage. So when I set it here to 20%, what does it mean? The 20% is with respect to the size of the parent element. I mean, what is the parent element here? 2p. In this case, it's the body, no? Because the body is the parent of the p. In the hierarchy, the body is the one that has a specific value, so this one will occupy the 20%. Let's say, for instance, that it occupies 10%, and let's say that the body will have Okay, so I'm doing super ugly things here, but just to show you what does it mean each property. So in this one, he takes or he sets as the padding a padding of 10% that is regarding these 200 that I declare for the parent element, okay? That's the way it behaves. Then I can set it to 10. VH. What does VH, what's the property? Yeah, that it means that it will occupy 10% with respect to the height of the window, let's say, not of the parent element, but of the window. Then we can say it to 10. It is. To the vertical width. That this one is regarding the space that I have here in the whole window, okay? Not the parent element, but the whole window. And then the one that we were trying to see before, that is the rem, no? So I'd say it is to rem. How does this one work? So it is not a percentage of the parent element, it is not a percentage of the whole window, but it is a measure relative to the font size that I have declared for my document. Okay? How do we know that? If we change, for instance, look at this distance that we have here, at the padding that we are having here in this moment. If I set the font size to, which were the options? Small. This one should change in relation to the font size that I have for my element, for my elements within here. Okay. So what's the advantage of doing it with the font size? That depending on the window, if the size gets smaller, then all of the elements will automatically render correctly and will display correctly regarding that specific measure. Okay. And let me. Is this clear up to now? Is it clear the difference between one and another? Questions? Yeah. Okay, so that's the next slide. Always we will try to prefer relative units, especially for what concerns the layout of the website. I mean the big elements, the structural elements, we will always try to define them with relative elements. So because in that way we make sure that they are visible and they display well in each screen or in all of the screens. The small elements such as the buttons, the what else, the margins, something like that, or for instance here I defined, I can say it, this border to be solid and to have 5 pixels. So for me it's fine if it is 5 pixels in the computer, in the phone, in the iPad, because 5 pixels doesn't make any difference. But with the structural elements and with the measures of how much space they will occupy, it is always better to use the relative units. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What I did was here, no? It was like this. And then I set this to be, for instance, 5 pixels. So in this case, the border will be 5 pixels, but it will not have like a big impact on how the elements will display, or it won't make everything crash. So in this specific example, it's fine if we use an absolute unit, but with the width and the heights and that kind of stuff, it's better to use the relative ones. Here in this slide, I left you like this wildcard if you want to take a look at them and experiment with them. Okay, and here we have the absolute ones, here the relative ones, the explanation on each one. And yeah. Do we have any questions? Is everything working up to now? Perfect. So if you want, we can take a break, like 15 minutes break, and we'll see here by 4 or 5, and we'll continue, okay?